So welcome back to Room 1-on-1 from the Homeboys. We special effort this time as we cross over to one of the shiny professional type Celtic podcasts out there, as we welcome Tino from the ever excellent Celtic Exchange podcast onto the show. Tino, how are you, my man?
Scott, I'm good. It's been a good few days to be a Celtic fan given the Rangers collapse. So in good form, mate. And listen, thanks for having us on. Looking forward to the chat.
Well, you say thanks for having us on. Just to let you know, you can probably see a shiny new feel here. Tino's actually hosting me tonight, and then he's giving it to me. So thanks for that as well. Appreciated.
No worries.
Right. Tino, as regular listeners to the show, specifically the main show, they'll know I listened and absolutely loved the recent Battle to Save Celtic series of shows you recently produced and hosted, with many of the main players at that tumultuous time of our club. Now, Chris McGuigan of the Lost Boys done a series of Celtic history podcasts a good while ago. And I would say that those, along with your stuff, are now massively important podcasts that should be listened to by everybody and held in high esteem. Because I think you already know my feeling, but I thought they were absolutely brilliant. The way you produced them, the way you set them up, the way you allowed your guests to tell the story, I thought it was excellent, mate, and I think you deserve massive pat on the back.
Listen, thanks for that. And you know, just at the top of the piece, I need to thank everyone that's got in touch. We've had an amazing response to it, whether it be folk on Twitter, YouTube, the message boards, folks emailing directly, sending different messages. And it's been great, and it's been pretty overwhelming, to be honest with you. And if I'm being honest, the whole thing kind of came about a wee bit by chance. I'd love to say this was a years in the making, you know, carefully thought out thing. But like a lot of these things in Celtic world, came about through somebody mentioning something and different things.
Right, I'm going to stop you there then. I'm going to stop you there. Before we crack into that, right? So as I say, I love the series and stuff. However, we've got a wee tradition on the show that the new guests tell us a wee bit about themselves. Now, you don't need to get it, but even if you want to kind of introduce us more about the show as well, because the Celtic Exchange, it kind of blew onto the scene and it's just grew to a point that it's an excellent show. So tell us a wee bit, how are you a Celtic man for a start, and then tell us a wee bit about the show, mate.
Okay. I suppose I'm a Celtic fan kind of in the way a lot of us will be, that you're just kind of born into it, and that's that. You don't have a choice, which is all good. So my dad was born in a street called Delburn Street, which is no longer there just now, but it's in Parkhead, or was in Parkhead. Delburn Street became the Iron Brew Factory, if you remember that, and it's now semi-modern houses. Sits in behind the Black Bull pub, if anyone knows that. And so my dad was literally born in the shadow of Celtic Park, so that was obviously his background. Him and his brother, my Uncle James. And then that's naturally passed into me. So myself, my brothers, my sister even, we were just always going to be a Celtic-minded kind of family. So that was kind of my background into Celtic, and I dare say a lot of folks will have a similar story. I've got, my mum's from Denison, she's got her parents, my grandparents were both from Donegal, so there's a whole Donegal connection there. So kind of didn't have a choice in that front, and that's all good with me. So that's my Celtic background. In terms of the podcast and how it came to be, so I worked at Celtic for a time. I worked there around about 2012 to 2014.
Right, okay.
And long story short, as part of that, good friend of mine, fella Paul, that I worked with at the time, around about lockdown time, put me in touch with a fella who has a recording studio in town and was looking to do a bit more stuff in terms of the Celtic world. And at that time, you know, people couldn't get out, couldn't get to games. I started doing a few things with John Hartson. So we started recording these post matches. Me and John would get into the studio and do 20, 25 minutes on one of the worst seasons in Celtic's history, to be honest with you, but that's by the by. So we started doing that, and then we realised exactly. So we realised there was maybe a wee bit more to it, and looking to do something a bit more regular and put out a bit more content. So long story short, we created what is now the Celtic Exchange in December 2020. And actually, if I've got my dates right, it was the 20th of December 2020, which was the day Celtic lifted the quadruple treble at Hampden behind closed doors. We done episode 1 on that very night. I think we're on episode 154 as of this week in terms of the weekly stuff. So, and people are saying, oh, that's a bit glory hunter stuff, Tino, doing it when it's quadruple treble. But you and I both know that wasn't a great time to be a Celtic fan. It was a shift. But we've kept it going since then. Various guys, there's a lad, Miff, who's brilliant. Miff was on the very first show with me, and Miff's still there to this date. My brother James and Paddy, good friend of ours now, have all got on board. And they're the kind of core four of us. And there's a few other lads, Paddy, Joe, Brido, Assam, who joins us from time to time, who are all part of the team as well. So it's kind of, as you say, Scott, it's kind of grown arms and legs. And that's us now 3.5 years in, give or take.
Well done, sir. Well done. You're no homeboys, but well done. Right, anyway, to it. Right, you were kind of just about to get into your spiel there. So yeah, I'm kind of... So, as I said, loved the series. So I was 14 myself, and whilst, like yourself, I was a definite Celtic fan. I was early in my Celtic journey, so a lot of the minutiae of what happened kind of right over the head. So the reason I wanted to get you on, we were talking about it on the show, and I'd say is I'd like to speak to you and kind of get your feelings from it. So before we start, everybody should really know, but the 4th of March this year marked the 30th anniversary of the completion of the famous Celtic takeover in 1994, right? So before you get into the process itself, because that is my next question.
Yeah.
What were your main memories of that period that, like, before you even done this, that was ingrained in your head?
It's a great question, because what I've learned through this is that I didn't know the half of it. I knew less than half of it. Yeah. I'm similar age to you, Scott. I'm 43 just now, so I was 13 at the time, give or take. And all I remember at that time was just that Celtic were rotten. You know, things weren't going great on the park, and then you knew through your dad and uncles and various others that things were a riot off the park. And you remember the protests and the bed sheets and the sack the board jumpers, all those kind of things. But at that age, I think you're not really paying that much attention to off the park, and you certainly never think as a young teenager that Celtic will potentially ever go out of existence. So you're just thinking, and I'm going through high school at that time, and so are you, and you're getting hammered every week, or you're certainly not competing with Rangers and they're on their way to 9 in a row. So it's not a great time to be a Celtic fan at all. And as much as I say, as you know, there's stuff going on behind the scenes, you really don't know. You just know it was a poor time, and then as you get a wee bit older, you get a wee bit more knowledge on it, and you just know that it was a poor time in Celtic's history. But as I say, in the last couple of months, I've learned more than I ever thought possible about it, and it's been an education for me as much as anybody else.
I think that's probably why I liked it as much as I did, because you said we all thought we know what happened. And then this, I mean, like, honest to God, like, I get slagged off my pal because I keep going, and these were, wow. When somebody says, wow. And I was sitting watching your show going, fucking hell, wow. And I'd be like, in the chat, what about this? To like a few of the guys in our group who'd be older, and they go, I remember that. And I'm like, fucking hell. So aye, brilliant. That's exactly it. Right, so let's get to the process.
Okay. When
did you decide to take on the series? In the early days, did you realise it was going to be as big? Did you realise it's going to be as much work as it ended up being?
No is the answer to both things. So, I mean, it's definitely blown up in a way that I couldn't have imagined. And in terms of hard work, I say hard work, but it's the same as yourself, Scott. All the stuff we do, it's kind of labour of love, isn't it? You just you're engrossed in Celtic anyway. You're kind of, it's just part of your makeup. So yeah, a lot of research had to go into it and different things, and the Celtic wiki was phenomenal. See, in terms of an archive and a space to brush up on stuff. And Joe Blogs from Celtic Wiki has been phenomenal. So in terms of research, loads of stuff there, several books that I've since read and all that stuff. But it's pretty enjoyable research for the most part. And in terms of the planning of it, as I was kind of leaning towards at the start, it must have been around about mid-February. I get a message on Twitter from a fella called Matthew Marr, but Matthew's on Twitter as Hail Hail History. Matthew himself is a Celtic author. I think he's written a book about Celtic's first ever title win, which is 1890, whatever. Really good guy, very passionate Celtic fan. Matthew does like Celtic walking tours and different things as well. And he dropped me a very kind of casual note saying that, Tino, as you know, it's the 30-year anniversary coming up next month. I wouldn't have remembered it without Matthew telling me. He's prompted that, said, you know, coming up 4th of March, it's going to be 30 years to the day. And Matthew at the time, I think, had spoken to both Matt McGlone and David Lowe for a couple of web articles he was doing. I think Matthew writes for a few different Celtic sites. So he'd spoken to them in terms of some interviews, but he felt there was a potential for doing a podcast series and getting the story out there in audio format / YouTube format. So he dropped us this very casual note. And at the time, I'll need to dig back now and see how I replied. But I think at the time I thought, I'll have a think and I'll see what happens. And I didn't take it too seriously at that point, but I did take the opportunity to message both Matt McGlone and David Lowe, both of who follow the Celtic Exchange on Twitter, so I could send them a message. And both replied pretty sharpish to say, yep, happy to speak about it. Let me know and we can line up some dates. So kind of shared numbers with the guys. And before you know it, we were recording with Matt McGlone. So I think we recorded with Matt first on the anniversary, if I've got my dates right here now, the 4th of March this year was on a Monday. And I'm sure I recorded with Matt on the Friday before the anniversary. And I definitely recorded with David Lowe on the very day. So 30 years to the day, I was sitting with David. And both those guys came on and were very generous with their time. And, you know, these guys are all guys who I think they're fairly thick-skinned. They know that they're not everybody's cup of tea in different ways, but they put their head above the parapet when it wasn't easy to do so in Celtic world. Actually, between Matt McGlone and Jim Orr, I've got a fairly similar story in terms of they were part of the fan groups at the time. And both those fellas have said to me just, you know, how not poorly received they were at the time, but they had a lot of friction, a lot of pushback from Celtic fans. As much as everyone knew things weren't going particularly well at the time, to come out and say, we're going to take action against this board and here's flyers and we're going to have meetings. I think the majority of Celtic fans at the time were saying, no, listen, we know things aren't great, but that's our club. Don't you be rocking the boat.
Yeah, 100%.
So I think certainly that's...
You seen it, Tino, didn't you?
You do. You know, if it's not... You see a lot of people speaking out against Celtic just now on Twitter and different things, and mostly with good intentions. Some people are troublemakers, but most folk are with good intentions because... I don't want to get all fluffy and flowery here, but it's something that means so much to you. So if things aren't going well and the people that are running the club aren't doing it in the way that potentially you or I might see fit, you're going to get a wee bit upset about it, and that can lead to people saying things online. But it's not a popular stance to take, and even less so back in the 80s and 90s when we certainly didn't have social media or the internet. So you had guys like Matt and Jim Orr flying fans at games to say, we need to do something about here and speak out against the club. So it wasn't a popular move to make at the time, and that's where I think real credit has to go to these guys, because it's easier, Scott, just to sit in the background. I'd say the majority of us would probably, amongst pals or down the pub, say, oh, that's poor, he's doing this, he's doing that. But how many of us actually really step up and do something? And I think that's where the real credit for Matt and Jim Orr come into play. So Matt was episode 1, and he just cast a whole lot of light. Matt's story in general, if it was only Matt's story we put out there, it's pretty entertaining. Yeah. Matt's got a book called Emotionally Celtic.
Emotionally Celtic, yeah.
And it's a decent read, and it gives you a whole lot of background in terms of some of the... Matt's quite in my opinion, from the short time I've known him, he's quite an ideas guy, quite a creative guy. So he was very much into some of the PR stunts, you know, the thing they done at the Bank of Scotland down at George Square. He ended up in Michael Kelly's office recording a meeting, as you might have picked up on.
That was mad.
And loads of other things. I also asked Matt about, you know, the tagline, back the team, sack the board, which to an extent could still apply to this day, 30 years on. Matt wasn't quite sure who came up with that. He said it might have been him, but it might not have been. But I think what has come through, there was 5 guys in Celts for Change. So it was Matt, I need to get my names right, Brendan Sweeney, David Cunningham. Forgive me just now, there's 2 other names which will come back to me. But it's, you know, Matt was the spokesperson, if you like. But, you know, there's several guys.
He was definitely the figurehead, wasn't he? Because he's the guy that I certainly remember.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously because his group became the prominent group after Jim Orr's. I mean, that without taking you off your story, that's how I found Jim Orr's story massively interesting, because I didn't know anything about them. I've only heard about him, didn't know anything. And as you rightly said, Matt McGlone had released the book. So I'd read the book, so I kind of knew. When Matt McGlone was talking, it was a great refresher for me. But there was a few wee things in there. But as you said, it was a great start, an absolutely great start.
Yeah, and you know, I had snippets. I think most, if not all, Celtic fans certainly know who Matt is. Mm-hmm. And I think... I wouldn't say Matt splits opinion as such. It's not quite as much as that. But there's some Celtic fans who Matt isn't their guy, and that's cool. And I think there's potentially a wee bit of know if jealousy is quite the right word, but I think a few folk potentially think that Matt takes too much credit for what happens. In my short dealings with Matt, that's not the case. Speaking on and off air with Matt, he's very quick to give credit to the various other guys that took part. It just, like at Lumpet, Matt was front and centre, and that's why a lot of us remember Matt from that time. So the book in itself was a real refresher for me. And then to ask Matt the questions in episode 1, and Matt's a good talker, he's a good storyteller, so he could really expand on that and give real background. And actually, as you rightfully say there, Jim Orr's group, Save Celtic. So Willie Wilson is the guy who deserves the big credit there. Willie Wilson, I think, founded Save Celtic. And that's kind of come about by chance. I was keen to get Willie, but couldn't find them, couldn't have access. I've since realised, I hope he doesn't mind me saying, but I think he's retired out in Spain now. So he's not around Glasgow, but Jim is, and you might know, or you might have heard from Jim, that he now writes Celtic plays and different things. He's around, and actually we'd had Jim on the podcast last year when he was promoting Bend It Like Bratback, his play there. And Jim and Willie's group, Save Celtic, was the precursor to Celts for Change. So they were the first ones, along with some support from Not The View fanzine and Once a Tim fanzine, which was Matt's. They were the ones that first started kind of instigating a wee bit of things aren't right here, and we as a fan base need to do something about it. So Willie Wilson, Jim Orr, and various others eventually set up what has now become this infamous meeting at Shettleston Town Hall. This meeting blows my mind. See if this were ever to become a play or a TV show or something, it should centre around this meeting, because this is a meeting where Joe Beltrami chairs it. Everyone I think knows Joe Beltrami, you know, famous Glasgow lawyer, looked out for a lot of the big hitters in the Glasgow underworld at that time. But Beltrami chairs it. Jerry Dunbar speaks. Jerry is founder of Not The View. And all going well, Jerry's going to come on and tell his story. Jerry and a fella called Average Joe Miller, who's also Not The View. So all going well, we'll get Jerry and Joe on soon, because I think they played such an important part. But they were the ones at that time who started to make the run-of-the-mill fans aware of things aren't right, and there's a group here called Save Celtic who are trying to do something about it. So they promoted that meeting at Shettleston Town Hall. Joe Beltrami speaks, Jerry speaks, I think Willie Wilson speaks on the day, and Brian Dempsey speaks. And I think, I'm pretty sure I revealed this in one of the episodes, but that audio exists right now, and I couldn't believe it when I found that audio. Paul John Dykes at Axum. I was going to say
Axum stuck up, didn't he?
Paul John's been a big support to me in this. I didn't know Paul John that well. I've got to know him well recently. He couldn't have been more helpful, connecting me to different guys and just been really supportive of the show. And it was he who posted that audio. The audio lives on YouTube somewhere. Anyone can search for it right now. It's something like 7 or 8 years old, and there's something like 300 or 400 listens or views to it, and that's it. It's kind of hidden away in Celtic world. I believe Paul John's looking to do something with it, and he's going to create some video pieces and stuff, which I'm sure will be impressive as always.
You think with AI, this they could do a wee storyboard with that, couldn't they?
They'll do something. I do think they've got something in the post, so that'll be worth watching as well. But I got access to the audio, and it blew me away, because as I spoke to the various different guests, whether it's Matt or even David Lowe or Jim Orr, they all spoke about this this meeting, and I thought with the passage of time, there was a wee bit of poetic license about just how spectacular this meeting was, and how it all took shape, and Brian Dempsey had folk in tears and all that kind of stuff. If you listen to the audio, Scott, and I'll share it with you after, or you can dig around for it, particularly when it gets to Brian Dempsey, and credit to all the guys who speak really passionately. Jerry, Willie Wilson, Joe Beltrami speaks well at the top of the piece. But Brian Dempsey, it's really hairs on the back of the neck stuff. It's brilliant. And I now know, since having spoken to Brian, that he said he never ever took, prepared for speeches with notes. He never had notes or prompts in front of him. But what he did do was got an idea of what he wanted to speak about and then spoke from the heart. He is a really engaging guy, a really brilliant talker. And it's about 30 minutes worth of audio from that particular meeting. It blows you away. It blew me away. It was absolutely brilliant to hear it. And I think that meeting at that time really started to let Celtic fans know, run-of-the-mill fans know of just how precarious a situation we're in here as a club. Again, this is education that I've picked up in recent weeks and months now. The Taylor report, which was a result of the Hillsborough disaster in 1989, the Taylor report is what really put the pressure on the current, or the board at the time, to drag themselves into the modern era. The requirement was there for an all-seater stadium that had to be in place by 1994. And what became apparent really was that the existing board, the old board,
no clue,
weren't capable. You know,
do you remember they stuck the benches in the jungle?
Very temporarily. Yeah.
Fucking hell, man.
I think the chat is that if the Taylor report hadn't kicked in, the old board would have just kicked things into the long grass and let Celtic be a run-of-the-mill club for as long as they could. What you had going on over at Ibrox, there was a lot of underhand stuff going on with the money. So Lawrence Marlborough came in at first and then David Murray. And what they done as a club is they found access to funds that they were willing to borrow, and they had certain relationships with certain banks by the sounds of it that Celtic weren't willing to do at that time. So Celtic were very much doing we'll just live in our means, and Rangers were living beyond their means, spending money on England internationals. You had the situation that the English clubs were banned from Europe. So guys like Terry Butcher and Gary Stevens and Ray Wilkins and others still wanted to play European football. Moving to Scotland gave them an avenue to do so. So Rangers all of a sudden were getting all these big hitters. Graham Souness comes in around that time. And I suppose importantly, post-Ibrox disaster, which I think was 1971, they were ahead of the game. They took the decision at that point to modernise their stadium. So they had this, Jim Orr describes at the time as quite futuristic, space age, all-seater stadium type thing, way ahead of the curve. And Celtic hadn't even thought about doing that. Then the Taylor report kicks in 89, and all of a sudden they have to do it, whether they like it or not. And that's what really put the pressure on the old board. So around the time of that meeting in Shettleston Town Hall, February 1991, the guys like Willie Wilson, Jerry Dunbar, Brian Dempsey, and keep in mind Brian Dempsey had just been removed from the old board 3 or 4 months prior, which is another story in itself. At that point, they were communicating to the regular fan base, this club right now are in trouble and we need to do something about it, and that's exactly what they set out to do.
Brilliant, mate. Absolutely brilliant. Right, see, before I start poking at you and the guests, you've already you've actually just said there that now you suggested on the show that you'd approached Michael Kelly. What was the feedback with him? Who else did you have in mind once the ball started rolling? And I clocked on the Peter Grant one. You said to us that you kind of suggested Fergus might happen. Now, I presume Fergus, if you get Fergus, he's completing the set. Yeah. But who else would you or do you have in mind?
So, in terms of, as things started to kind of snowball a wee bit and I got into episode 3 and 4, it became really clear to me that I was really keen to get Brian Dempsey, because everyone to a man up to that point had raved about Brian in different ways. Some people wouldn't necessarily agree with his approach. I'm not sure where him and David Lowe would stand, if they would be guys that would grab a pint together, for example. But everyone spoke about Brian, the talent he was, the speaker he was, all these things. And I thought, I actually didn't even know if he was still around Glasgow, because I knew he'd lived in the States for a while. Brian had heart trouble, I think, around about 2005. I think he was in Florida at that time. I really wasn't sure where he was. But I seen an article in the paper from mid-February. Hugh Keevins had spoken to him mid-February. So, and there was a photo of them at that time. So I thought, he must be around. He must be here or thereabouts. And it was actually Hugh that put me in touch with Brian. And we'll get to it. Hugh Keevins was brilliant, and is brilliant as a guy, by the way. And I know a lot of folk won't like hearing that. There's Hugh Keevins that we know on the radio, and there's what I would like to call the real Hugh Keevins. He is a brilliant guy and a really kind guy, and a guy who's got real warm feelings when it comes to Celtic. But I suppose we'll get to that. So yeah, I realised that I was really keen to speak to Brian, and Hugh's the guy that sorted that out, and that was brilliant. But beyond that, of course, you've got the two big hitters, which is Fergus and Michael Kelly. And everyone, it's not quite as straightforward as old board bad, Fergus and the Rebels good. There's a few kind of blurred lines in between there. And I was really keen, of course, if I could.
I think Michael Kelly stays in the band, mate. I don't think he gets out of there.
Probably. But what I was keen to do was, at least knew I had to try and get them and reach out. So Fergus has got a PR guy here in Scotland who's been his PR guy since he took over at Celtic, a fella called Peter, who is a really nice guy, a really kind guy. So I knew if I was going to get Fergus, it would be through him. And I emailed Peter, and he's, do you swear in this? Are you allowed to swear on this show?
Yeah.
Peter sent me back the nicest fuck off email I've ever seen. Right? It was a really, I'd sent Peter the details of the show, sent him links to the various episodes we'd done up to that point. And he sent me back a really kind reply saying that he himself had listened to the show, really enjoyed what we were doing, thought it was a brilliant series. he said he would make sure Fergus got those recordings and heard them through, but also said to me at the time that Fergus had made a call around about 12 months ago, actually, that he wasn't going to do any more media with regard to that time in his life. And I've got to respect that and take that as it is. But Peter was really kind, sent me quite a lengthy, detailed reply. And what he said was, he says, I'll ensure that Fergus listens and we can go from there. He says, but at the moment, take it as no, unless things changed. I've been in touch back and forth with Peter a bit since then, but at the moment, it remains a no. And I remain hopeful. My hope is that Fergus would watch and go, I'm not letting Brian Dempsey say this, or I'm not letting David Lowe say that.
You're kind of hoping something pokes him in the side.
And, a genuine angle for the whole thing, kind of the tagline of the whole series has been that we want to try and tell the story from all angles. So we've had fan groups, financial guys, journalists, players, board members, all this kind of stuff. And whether it be Fergus or Michael Kelly, genuinely wanted to offer everyone the chance to have their own right to reply, because a lot happens over 30 years. People's memory changes, some untruths get spoken in the media or otherwise. And I wanted to give everyone the platform to come on and say, well, here's my version of events and here's what I think should be out there on record. So that was my angle with Fergus, and it's been my angle with Michael Kelly. So Fergus is probably a no, but if anyone is going to get him on board, it would be Peter, who I need to thank for his kind of kind replies. I've spoken to Michael Kelly. I spoke to him on the phone a couple of weeks ago, and he was very decent on the phone. He's a very nice guy. These guys are in their 80s, Scott, so I think Michael Kelly and Fergus are both around about 84. Michael Kelly seemed pretty sharp, very chatty. And what he said, and again, I've got to respect this, what he said was, to a huge extent, he doesn't know if he's got the energy to do something like this, because he knows the flack that then comes back the way. At that age in life, I don't know how much he would welcome that. And you can certainly talk about the merits of the baddie and the goodie and stuff, but, whatever age in life he is, I'm sure he's got family, grandkids, whatever else. Does he want or does he need the hassle? Probably not, but we kindly chatted and we've kind of kept the door open. So at the moment in time, same as Fergus, it's a no for now, but we've got a kind of fairly warm connection there, and we'll see where that goes. So
it's interesting. I mean, you're being kind of very polite about it and stuff, and naturally, as you say, somebody of an age and thing, the hatred is dissipated from the 30 years. You know what I mean? We look back at it and we actually celebrate it now. I mean, it's quite a unique thing that happened. But the fact that Michael Kelly was so, I mean, I don't know if this is true. He's still never set foot in Celtic Park since.
That's what I've heard. I don't know how true it is or not.
That sounds like bitterness because I don't know if you remember, right? And I'm saying I don't know if you remember. I can't even remember the bloody show's name. Under the Moon or something. It was something, and it was like a chat show, and a guest would come up and say a controversial opinion to a group, and the group would argue with them, right? I can't remember. It was on ITV late at night, and I remember Michael Kelly being on it after the takeover, and he was talking about how he would have took Celtic to the promised land and how Fergus McCann is selling. I'd need to go and dig in to find this show, but I always remember how adamant Michael Kelly was that this was wrong, what happened. And you were like, even you would think over time it would go, right, Keezy's, we made an arse of this, do you know what I mean? But it's the mad side of me is I would love to hear what he's got to say. Love to hear it.
So with that, and I think so that's throughout this, obviously having somebody like Tom Grant on in itself is relatively controversial, given Tom was old board. And I've got a mate, a fella that I mentioned earlier on to you, but I'll not mention him right now, who just won't listen to Tom Grant. He's saying, I just don't trust old board, and I like what you're doing, Tino, but I'm not listening to that episode, and that's cool. But what I've got to do, and I have done, is you've got to take all these guys at face value and give them the platform to tell their own story. And whether it's Tom Grant or Michael Kelly or anyone else, it's not for me to put words in their mouth. It's for me to put the platform there and for them to say, here's why X, Y, Z happened. And I think, like everything in life, there's two sides to all stories. So as much as right now, without knowing the finer detail, I would suggest Michael Kelly's taking the wrong approach. I was speaking to someone today, a fella called Matt Corr. Some folk might know of Matt Corr because he's also a Celtic author. He's written a book on Harry Hood and various other things. He's a tour guide at Celtic Park now. Matt's retired, but now does that. And you'll not meet a bigger Celtic fan than Matt Corr. Really kind guy, really nice guy. And I was chatting with him just this afternoon. And I was saying the one thing that I would offer up in defence of Michael Kelly or Tom Grant or any of these guys is that these guys all inherited Celtic. So Michael Kelly's, it's either his grandfather or great-grandfather was James Kelly, who played for Celtic's first ever team, then became one of, if not the first chairman of Celtic. And then the Kellys were part of Celtic's history from then on in, up until the 4th of March 94. Same as Tom Grant. Tom Grant's grandfather or great-grandfather sat on the very first Celtic board, and the Grants were part of Celtic history up until then. So what I offer up in defence of Michael Kelly, Tom Grant, Chris White, Kevin Kelly, these kind of guys is that, yeah, 100% they've made mistakes, I think, and there's been a lot of self-preservation going on. But imagine you're a Kelly or a Grant or whatever, and it all goes pear-shaped on your watch. You know, the club has been in your family since day dot, and it goes pear-shaped when you're in charge. That can't be a nice feeling. And I think what you've seen was, at times, the desperate actions of desperate men clinging on for dear life. You'll have caught the story, Scott, where several of the board members signed this kind of pact. I think it's been described as a Warsaw Pact, which meant that no one individual could sell their shares without the consent of the others. A very, very much a self-preservation move. Tom Grant was part of that. Michael Kelly, Kevin Kelly, I need to check, maybe Jack McGinn, Jimmy Farrell, not entirely sure. But these guys were all looking out for themselves, yes. But again, I think ultimately they didn't want to be the family member on whose watch it all went kaput. That's my only defence. And
do you know what, mate? Do you know what? It's an absolutely fantastic point, because you're coming at it from an angle that none of us think about. I never in my life, speaking about Michael Kelly, talking about that point, as we all have, never in my life have I ever thought about it that way. And it's a fair point. I mean, like, to us, allowing somebody better to do your job, it sounds natural when it comes to Celtic, doesn't it? But if you put it in other parts of your life, you'd be like, no chance, I know best, I've done this, you know what I mean? And that's very interesting, very interesting.
If you were Tom Grant or Michael Kelly and you were a director at random company, Microsoft, Scottish Power, whatever, and you're struggling at your job and someone comes in and says, listen, I'm just going to buy your shares off you, take this off your hands and you move on and go on with the rest of your life, you'd say, that's fine, because there's no emotional connection to such a brand.
Yeah.
Celtic, as we all know, is completely different. And you can say what you like about all of these guys and the mistakes that they made or didn't make. They are all Celtic fans. And so, from speaking to Michael Kelly a couple of weeks ago, once he politely told me to F off, we had a chat just about football and Celtic. The guy's a bona fide Celtic fan and very up to date with what's going on just now and talking about the good, bad and indifferent side of Celtic at this moment in time. Tom Grant, you'll have maybe heard from his episode, and I spent a wee bit of time with Tom before and after. Celtic mad, as Celtic as you or I, but obviously the caveat is that they played a prominent part in a terrible time in Celtic's history. So that is my defence. And on that side of things, Scott, I'm just trying to come at it from everyone's got their side of the story. And I'm sure that, listen, they'll have been a terrible time in their life. A real struggle, a real pressure, a real strain. And as I say, desperate actions from desperate men at different times. So that's my defence for potentially why they acted the way they did at the time.
The great thing about each guest, which I think makes it, is the fact that each character have been a divisive character at some point in their Celtic life. Do you know what I mean? You think about it, as you said, Matt McGlone comes out, he's a man, he's a figurehead. Afterwards, it's not so nice for Matt McGlone. Matt McGlone's still kind of a wee bit besmirched by a load of Celtic fans. Tom Grant, as you said, he's on the board. David Lowe, I mean, there's been allegations David Lowe's been talking rubbish. David Lowe's a bag man. I've heard all this part of, do you know what I mean? David Lowe, he carried it. That's all he done. Maybe kind of self-inflated his own story. Hugh Keevan's definite. You know what I mean? As you say, because Hugh Keevans almost plays a character in his life, doesn't he? Yeah. And then, I mean, it's so you put, and then Brian Dempsey, even Brian Dempsey, I remember I would have been a big Fergus man. And like, see the booing stuff, I know for a fact I never booed, because I was a big Fergus man. And I say a big, I was only a boy, but I was a big Fergus, because my dad always saying, this guy saved us, this, you can't. And I remember being sick that day. But I remember at the end of all that, kind of resenting Brian Dempsey because he fucked off and sold his shares. And you're kind of going, what's that? I mean, he's supposed to be leading us into the promise. Like, who's this bum? I mean, and then when you hear their side of the story, there is a kind of step back and just appreciate what you listen to. Do you know what I mean?
I think you're right, though. I think all of these guys, and to be involved in such a story, and I mean, as a hell of a story, there's always going to be conflict, you know, in these situations. So, as I say, I've found today we've had 7 guests, and today all of them have been spot on, very kind of their time, decent folks, you know, at face value. We've all got on pretty well. But at some point in their life, you know, during that time, 30 odd years ago, they've had to fall out with people. They've had to put their neck on the line. They've had to say things which aren't popular. And even like Brian Dempsey basically said, and I'm paraphrasing here, but Brian said something along the lines of, it would have come to blows with him and Fergus had he remained on board, because Brian was the one constant thread throughout the whole story. So I kind of start the story around about 1990, which is when Brian was on the board. I think he was co-opted onto the board in May of 1990, and by October, 5 months later, I believe the night before a League Cup final as well, was bagged. So Michael Kelly and Chris White, there's a bit of a board coup, a bit of a takeover, and Brian Dempsey's ousted from the board at that point. But at that point, Brian stays quiet for a few months, and then he speaks at that famous meeting, February 91, and then Brian is part of the whole story right up until March 94. And I think it's a bit of a regret, or I don't know if it's a regret of Brian's, but from a Celtic fan point of view, from the outside looking in, and I suppose I've had a bit of an insight now, for me, Brian had all the talent to take Celtic forward. That audio piece that I mentioned, that 30 minutes at Shettleston Town Hall, it's in February 1991, so it's 33 years ago. Some of the stuff Brian Dempsey's talking about at that time is ahead of its time. He's talking about women in football, which, you know, now the women's game has blown up in different things. Brian's talking about that, talking about commercial opportunities, retail stuff with kit. He's saying all these things which people just weren't talking about back then. And I think it was a loss to Celtic that the club couldn't find a place for him on the board. Certainly as part of the old board, which he got removed from. But him and Fergus clearly just couldn't get on side. Fergus, I suppose, needed Brian and Brian's charisma, because Fergus wasn't that guy. Fergus was absolutely the brains, but not the charisma. Brian supplied that part of things, and it's just a shame that they couldn't have stayed together as a partnership beyond the 4th of March, but it wasn't to be, and Brian moved on to different things. But I do think that was a loss to Celtic.
That is interesting, because I always remember the Fergus McCann thing was when Fergus came in. Like I said, you remember the boys against bigotry thing, and I've got a lot of Irish friends, and that caused lots of problems, right? Between me and my friends, we'd be arguing about it. Do you know what I mean? He's attacking us, he's attacking us. And I would always defend Fergus, because Fergus was a Celtic man. And I think it was like the late 80s, he'd put this proposal. And he'd said, if I'm right, my good mate John Joe, I'm sure his dad showed me it, he sent season ticket holders an envelope, and it was like a stadium plan. And this was in the late 80s, would that be right?
I'm not sure when that was. You can see that. So he basically sent a prospectus type thing. A white envelope with green writing on it. Inside it, there was a letter from Fergus, various other things. I think Matthew Marr that I mentioned might have a copy of that, but it's on the Celtic Wiki, as everything is. If you go on the Celtic Wiki and onto that page, you can kind of see some of the documentation. So I can't recall right now if there was a stadium plan, but yeah, Fergus tried to get into Celtic around about 1989.
That's
so
right,
he had made his millions promoting golf tours. I think golf tours back into Scotland and things from America. Made a very serious marketing background and in that sports world. And he approached Celtic. He's a bona fide Celtic fan, grew up. It's debatable whether it was Kilsyth or Croy, but that part of the world, I think he was part of the Kilsyth Celtic Supporters Club. And he approached the club at the time. So Michael Kelly didn't come on the board till May 1990, same time as Brian Dempsey. So at the time, I think it was Chris White and some others. And they were happy to welcome Fergus into the boardroom for a couple of games and to enjoy his company. But they also, I don't want to say ridiculed him, but they were very quick to say, thanks for your ideas, Fergus, but not required here. He basically wanted to, at that early stage, break up the family dynasty. The Kellys, the Whites, the Grants.
I think he definitely wanted to modernise Celtic. I mean, like I remember when he came in and he had the American idea. And to go back to your point for a minute ago, and I can see where the clash might come, where he's walking in with fresh ideas. Brian Dempsey's sat there, looked at it, knows what ideas need to come in, and I can imagine the two of them coming together and this one just dismissing this one. Do you know what I mean? And equally so. I mean, like, I'll tell you a ridiculous story about the building of the stadium. So you know that all three stands were all built by different contractors, eh? So,
no, I don't know that.
So the north stand was first, obviously, and a wee guy I worked with, he was on the job. He was a plumbing guy on the job, the plumbing engineer for the job. And Fergus McCann, he said, I want every stall to be selling chips, and I want it right this way. He walked round me, I mean, I want this, and I want chips cooking here and hot dogs here, and he went in the toilets, and Fergus McCann said, and this wee guy says to him, Fergus, you do know that football fans don't wash their hands? And Fergus McCann says, what? And he says, football fans, they'll put a wee bit of cold water in their hands and that'll be it. And that's how we didn't get hot water in the stands. Because it's some wee Hun plumber for fucking wee, like I worked with, wee Tam. And that's he says, you notice there's no hot water. And see if you get in the main stand, there's hot water. You got the north stand, there's no hot water. And that's because a wee Hun told Fergus McCann he couldn't get it.
I mean, that's strange. I mean, what you had this kind of situation where post takeover, Tom Grant, Jimmy Farrell, Jack McGinn and Kevin Kelly, I think all get kept on in some capacity.
Yeah.
And I think that was potentially Fergus's way of thanking them for eventually, swinging things in the Rebels' favour and all that stuff when it came to shares and votes and whatever. So Tom Grant was heavily involved in the development of the stadium. His job was, I think, stadium director or stadium development officer or something like that. And you might have picked up, Tom's got a ridiculous collection of photos from that time. He basically said he always used to take photos and, personal life and otherwise. And he's kind of documented the whole building of the stadium in a personal file. It's mad that the club in itself didn't say, look what we're doing, we're dragging the club into the modern era, let's document it. But I suppose maybe social media wasn't what it is now, or it wasn't even a thing. But Tom had the foresight to take these photos. Some of these photos are fascinating, and he sent me a few just by message after we recorded. And there's one photo which essentially has Celtic Park as the main stand in the front, the modern kind of front facade of Celtic Park, and nothing else. There's no park, there's no North Stand, there's no Lisbon Line stand, there's no Jock Stein stand. It's just a front and a building site behind it, and it blows your mind, blows my mind anyway to see things like that. So yeah, I'm sure there's all sorts of quirks and stories at the time as to why they done things, but fascinating to see Celtic Park at that time go from what it was. And Jim Orr was kind of taking the piss out of me, thinking, oh, you're too young, Tino, you won't remember the jungle when guys...
I heard that, I started laughing at that.
I remember that. So I'm same age as you, right? 43, 44. We used to go to the Celtic end. My dad would take us into the Celtic end for whatever reason. But when I was younger, I used to go to... Now and then I'd go on the bus. I remember a lad, Patrick Kelly, I was pals with when I was younger. And Paddy Kelly and his mates used to always go to the jungle. And you'd come in at the kind of Celtic end side, but you'd walk all the way. I don't know if there was only one entrance, one exit at the time. But you'd walk all the way to the far side, and it's as cliched as it sounds, but you did have the guys pissing down the back of your leg and bags of cans everywhere, and it was chaos. And actually, if we're talking seriously for a second about post Hillsborough, it wasn't fit for purpose, it wasn't safe. But yeah, very much, I had that experience. So going from that at Celtic Park to what we now know and what Fergus created, phenomenal difference. And it wouldn't have happened, couldn't have happened under the old board. They just didn't have the vision or the capability.
No, I mean, I'm for Campbell's lying, so I remember. So I used to go to Trinity High School, which is still there, but they've knocked it down and rebuilt it. But anyway, across the road from Trinity, where you've got like the football pitch, there's a housing estate, and there's a wee park you can walk through. Now, there used to be football pitches there, right? And then one day, boom, this is toxic waste. You cannot walk across this, right? That's, I kid you not, you were getting suspended from school if you walked across the toxic waste. And this was the same kind of land that Celtic were going to buy. Do you know what I mean? So, but what I didn't understand is Brian Dempsey sat and told categorically you can't build a stadium here. And even right now, you can there's bloody a big load of hussies on it the new. Do you know what I mean? So
yeah, I believe the land was condemned, so that's a strange one. But it sounds like the board were tying themselves in knots. They knew they had to come up with some sort of plan. They knew they had to appease the fans at the time. And actually, takeover was 4th of March, as we all know. But the board, as late as January and maybe even February, were still making noise about this fantasy field of dreams in Cambuslang. There's a really famous picture of Kevin Kelly on the front of the Celtic View. Like, here is the promised land. And it was never, ever going to happen. Celtic tied themselves in knots. I don't want to say they made up stories, but they said there was a group called Geffinor, a finance who were behind it, and then Geffinor get approached by STV or something. They denied all knowledge. The whole thing was unravelling before their very eyes. So, Cambuslang project, there's a great quote, and I've mentioned it a couple of times through the series. Fergus McCann described it as a fantasy project which could only ever be financed by the fairy godmother. He was quoted at that time, and I think I gave that quote, mentioned it to Hugh Keevins and to Brian Dempsey, and they both agreed it was bang on. It was never, ever, ever going to happen.
Right. So, as we spoke about, and you've already confirmed, you've done a shitload of research. But see, before you spoke to anybody, right, and anybody kind of, when you had Matt McGlone lined up and then you were thinking we could kick on for here, what was in your head that you were desperate? What was burning away at your head that you wanted to find out about?
I don't know if there's any one thing, Scott, but as I said, what has kind of became almost the accidental tagline is that we wanted to tell the story from every angle. And as I mentioned there, we've got former player, board and all that stuff. And that was all it was really, because I think we all had the headlines and we all had what we thought happened. So I mentioned earlier on, I spoke to Matt Corr. Hope Matt doesn't mind me sharing his age, but Matt's wrong side of 60 or other side of 60. So Matt was in his 30s at that time. And, pretty fresh in his memory. And Matt's a guy that knows potentially as much, if not more, than anyone I know about Celtic. John Colquhoun maybe knows a bit more, but Matt knows a lot of stuff about Celtic. And he himself said it's been a real education for him, because there's what we all thought we knew, and there's what really happened, or at least what the 7 guests so far, their version of events has been. So that's all I wanted to do. I just wanted to shed light on what was definitely the most pivotal moment in modern Celtic history. You can talk about all the on-field stuff and Martin O'Neill time and Henrik Larsson achievements and all these things, which are all huge, milestones in Celtic history, if you like. But in terms of the off-the-field stuff in the modern era, this is as big as it got. This was literally, I don't want to put any more drama on it than necessary, but this was literally the 8 minutes from extinction thing David Lowe speaks about, signing the papers at 11:52 ahead of a 12 p.m. deadline. So we all knew, and as I say, 13 or whatever at the time, but as you get older, you all realised how perilously close Celtic came to extinction. So really when it came about, and as I say, when Matthew Marr sowed the seed, my take on it, and as I was doing a wee bit of prep, was let's just try and get different angles on it and different takes on it, and we'll see where it goes. And one mate, who was it now? It was Miff from the show. Miff was chatting to me about it, and he says what you do get in the first half a dozen episodes or so is various guys telling the same story, all with slightly different twists on it. They've all got slightly different recollections, but they all kind of corroborate each other. David Lowe might remember a certain meeting slightly different from Brian Dempsey, but they're all there or thereabouts, but just with their own spin on it, and that's life. We all remember things slightly different.
I thought that almost gave the show legitimacy, because they're telling a story, and whilst they might have their own wee angle, their own thoughts at that point, basically, as you say, they were corroborating exactly what happened. So if you've got 4 people coming from the different angles, all with the same story, then it's the fucking truth then, did you? Know what I mean? That's
it. And as I say, as much as David Lowe and Brian Dempsey might not be best pals at this moment, and maybe they are, I don't know, but just
having a beer now.
But what they do is, in a roundabout way, they all back each other up. Yes, this happened. That was happening at that time. This lot were doing that. That lot were doing that. So there was so much at play, and that's the thing. It's a lot of folk have said there's so much more to it, because it's not just 4th of March is the kind of focal point, but everything that happened before that. I mean, there's genuine drama. There's meetings, there's cloak and dagger.
You're going to talk about it, but what your show also done for me, for another massive point in Celtic's history, was the Judas stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, the Tom Grant, I sat stunned when Tom Grant revealed, because I didn't know that. I didn't know the stuff that I didn't know he'd bought himself out his contract.
Yeah.
I didn't know that Celtic had an agreement with him. I didn't know that. And then what Peter's talking about, he's sitting on a bus waffling away.
Yeah.
Honestly, it was a case of with me for all
Yeah.
that. And you say, and how many people correlated that as the ultimate beginning of the end for the board?
Yeah, it became a really interesting one because, as I say, I've done a lot of research, and I like to think any given interview we do that, you know, we give the right prep for it, if you like. But the Mo Johnston thing wasn't on my radar. And some people won't even mention Mo Johnston, you know, he who won't be mentioned, and Le Petit Merde and all that stuff. But it was Tom Grant who brought it up first. I think it was Paul John said to me, Tom's got a good story about Mo Johnston, you might want to prompt him on that. And Mo Johnston, the saga, I certainly remember at the time, I always remember my dad saying words to the effect, I can't believe he's done that to Big Billy. I.e., he sat with Billy McNeill. He was wearing a horrendous wool jumper. holding the Celtic shirt. And everyone thought it was a done deal. And again, chatting to Matt Cord today, that the suggestion was that Mo Johnston and Charlie Nicholas were going to be Celtic strike force for the 1990 season and or 89-90 season, and how exciting that would have been. Johnston going away to Nantes and kind of developed as a player. And then for things to unfold in the way they did, in the underhand manner in which they did, and Bill McMurdo was the agent, and Bill McMurdo lives, or at least lived, in a red, white and blue sandstone house in Uddingston called Ibrox, all that stuff, right? There was no hiding his allegiances. But the way it happened, but yeah, the blow your mind thing was the fact that there was a done deal. There was a signed contract. Celtic held the player's registration. And Tom made the point, and in hindsight, I should maybe have pushed him on it, but you've got a lot going on at the time when you're interviewing, you've got things that you want to get to, and sometimes you miss things. And I think in hindsight, if I could go back on that one, I might have pushed Tom to say, Tom was quite magnanimous, saying, listen, it wasn't going to work out. He then agreed to deal with Rangers, and we decided we didn't want to be churlish about it, and we released the contract. I would have played hardball all day long there.
Yes.
Because surely you can say, listen, that's your issue, Morris. You know, if you've got the rumours are that he had a tax bill to pay and he'd bought himself out his own contract and stuff, that's up to him and his agent to sort out. It's not Celtic's problem. But if he was going to be difficult and look for another move, Celtic should A, have held on his registration and said to him, go and find any other club.
Anybody else.
You're not going across the road. Go back down south. Go and see what's on offer down there, and then we'll release it. I think Celtic should have played hardball at that time, and I'm amazed. Well, I'm saying I'm amazed. It's maybe an indication of where the board were at that time, that they were so easy to deal with, and they kind of rolled over on that one. So I thought that was a pure move.
I'm literally still amazed. See, as we're sitting talking about it, I am still amazed. I mean, Tom Grant came across a very affable person, but when he says we didn't want to be churlish, I nearly heated the machine, man. I was like, you what? What? You allowed him to walk across the road and sign for your biggest... Because let's not kid ourselves on. However much we despise the man or loathe the man or even kind of just don't like the man, a smashing player, an absolutely smashing player.
Talented striker, and that was Peter Grant's point on it. Peter Grant felt that Mo Johnston, had he signed for Celtic that time, it might have been papering over the cracks, but Celtic would have gone on to win more than they did in the early part of the 90s. He was a talented striker. And again, you know, you talk about our own recollections of it. My own memory at that time, and as you get a wee bit older into your kind of late teens, my own memory was just that Celtic had some sort of verbal agreement, and then Mo Johnston went behind everybody's back and actually signed the papers with Rangers. But to realise or to learn that he had actually signed for Celtic, and as I say, my dad's comment about, I can't believe he done that to Big Billy, that's what has really jarred a lot of fans over the years. Billy McNeill, Celtic icon, the greatest ever Celt, and Mo Johnston backstabbed him and kind of made a mockery of him at the time. You know, just really scumbag behaviour, scandalous behaviour. But you know, again, there was a wee bit of, I don't want to quite say death by 1,000 cuts at that time, but there was so much going wrong at Celtic in that late 80s, early 90s period. And that turns out, as I say, it wasn't on my radar as part of this series to ask that question, but it came up pretty early. Tom Grant was episode 4 or 5. It came up pretty early, and I realised that it was quite a pivotal part and maybe indicative of just how shambolic Celtic were behind the scenes at that time.
Kind of, aye. It does surmise what we had running our team. We basically, it's like the Tories. We had a whole bunch of people who just weren't qualified to do what they're doing. But right, kind of on the home straight here, mate.
Okay.
Just again, back to yourself, right? So, did any of the stories or even opinions held, did they kind of sway your own preconceptions beforehand? And on the back of that, was there anything right out with the Mojo stuff that really, really surprised you?
It's a good question, and what we'll need to do, and it's not an ego move, but I want to go and listen to them all back at some point, because you're in the room at the time, and there's a lot of information coming at you.
And you're sitting with your sheet as well. So a lot's no.
And then before you know it, 24 hours later, you've got that out and it's out there, kind of thing. And actually, at one point, I'm going to take the time to kind of go through it again, because I wouldn't say there was any kind of one big eureka moment, but I found the whole thing just an education. And I can go through everybody from Matt to David Lowe to Jim Orr to Tom Grant to Hugh Keevins to Brian Dempsey to Peter Grant. Everybody, to a man, told me at different times things that I just did not know and would never have known. And I suppose that is a part of the series, because we're now in this, modern day and age where back in the day, stories like that might have been an article in the Daily Record or the paper or whatever. And if you didn't happen to buy the paper that day, that's gone forever. What I like, and I suppose to a point, what I take a bit of pride in is the fact that we've now got these stories on record. So they're there from the horse's mouth, from the guys that lived it and breathed it at the time. Brian Dempsey has told us this happened. Hugh has told us this happened. Peter Grant. These guys loved it. And there's a sense of pride that we've now managed to get that down on record. Yeah. So without there being any, not that I can think of right now, anything that just kind of blew my mind, there was just so much throughout that you go, geez, really did that? There's so many things throughout the 7 episodes that have been real eye-openers.
As you said earlier on, it really could be made into a movie, couldn't it? I mean, at the end of Brian Dempsey's one, I did have a wee kind of sit down and think, surely there's been cases like this in other football clubs where basically, right? And I mean, there's a very famous case, I don't know if you ever saw it, it was on YouTube, it's on YouTube, should I say, about the Barcelona takeover when Laporta takes over. That's excellent, that's really good. It was like a forced, but obviously they've got the elections thing, stuff like that. So I mean, it's such a unique story, such an interesting story, such a mad fucking story. And as you said, the fact that you've got it done now and it's there is excellent. It's really, really good. As I said right at the start of the show, it's something that I would always recommend somebody go and listen to that. Go and have a listen. Even go and listen to him. Go and listen to him today, and he'll educate you. Do you know what I mean? Because, like I say, I'm not a Celtic historian. I like to think I know what I'm talking about. Do you know what I mean? Maybe if you listen to the show, you'll fucking disagree. but every episode, something come up where I went, wow, that's amazing. That's excellent.
Do you know? And on that note, that's where I don't know if this is before or after we started recording, where I got to a point where it got to Hugh Keevins episodes where folks said, I'm not listening to that. That's not for me. Mm-hmm. And I had to kind of convince a few folks that I wouldn't properly know them, but I know them online, that they're very supportive of the show. They'd maybe tweet us or messages on YouTube or whatever. And I remember saying, or messaging several folk at the time saying, do yourself a favour, listen to the Hugh Keevins episode, for example, because there's so much detail in it. Again, Hugh Keevins comes at it from a point 30 years ago where you just couldn't get the word out on social media. So he played such a huge part in keeping the Celtic story front and centre. I met with Hugh earlier on the day for something. Hugh is, I would argue, as big a fan as you or I. He just doesn't show it outwardly. He is very warm in his feeling towards Celtic, speaks very emotionally about it, and there's a whole family connection there. But in terms of, from a professional point of view, his job was to, you'll have caught this, Scott, but he was working for the Scotsman at the time, an Edinburgh-based newspaper, more focused on rugby than football. And he kind of had free rein to go and do what he wanted to cover, whatever he was covering in Glasgow. He chose to cover the Celtic story, and he played such a pivotal part. But I suppose that's the thing about the various guests we've had on. They all played their part. I mentioned that without Jim or Willie Wilson and Save Celtic, you kind of don't end up with Celts for Change.
Yeah, yeah.
If you don't have Celts for Change, Brian Dempsey doesn't have a vehicle to try and win the hearts and minds of the supporters. If you don't have that, then Fergus McCann's takeover potentially fails, etc., etc. So Jim Orr, that you might have heard, Jim is really modest. He very much plays down the part he played. I would completely go against that, because Jim was one of not many folks at that time, as I say, who put their head in the chopping block when it wasn't popular to do so. And I think real credit is due to those guys. But as I say, everyone, however small they might feel or however modest they might be being, they've all played their part in what eventually became kind of the modern Celtic. I know that sounds dramatic, but the Celtic part we now see with 60,000 folk there, and you know, the foresight that Fergus McCann had to build a 60,000 seater stadium rather than a 50,000 seater, which gets you 10,000 extra season tickets, which gets you X million of a head start over Rangers every single year. All that kind of stuff doesn't happen without a meeting in Shelton Town Hall 33 years ago. I know that might sound for dramatic effect. It's not. That's what I firmly believe. There's so many guys back in the day. I talk about the fanzines, Jerry Dunbar and the message him and Joe Miller were putting out. All these guys played a part in what has now become the modern Celtic that we all know.
Right, mate. See, in terms of the show, that was excellent. Right, that's it. So what I'm going to do now, right? Just give you a wee clap there, mate. Well done, well done. Right, so we'll summarise at the end, kind of where to find them, how to listen to them, and again I'll recommend them. So let's have a wee chat before I let you go, right? So I've got a few wee things I want to ask you with regards what you've learned and stuff like that. Do you fear there is an element in our current board of the similar we know better?
Yes,
obviously it's not to the same extent, but more, we've done it for this long, we know how to do it, rather than we should entertain fresh ideas. Yeah,
do you know, the question you've just asked me is a question that I asked most of the guests, so maybe in the last 10 minutes of each episode. I just thought it was important that when you've got these guys in the room, the guys that have got experience of boardroom squabbles and different things, and the experience of things not going right, it's maybe important to ask them for their opinion on it. David Lowe was pretty strong in his opinion on the current board and not fit for purpose and stuff. Matt's maybe somewhere down that road, but not quite as strong. Hugh Keevans spoke out about Celtic's failure in Europe, which I think we can all see. Can't quite remember Jim's take on it and Tom Grant, but I asked that question.
This is how I want your take, mate. This is how I want your take.
So I mentioned at the top of the piece, I worked at Celtic, so 2012 to 2014. There's lots of folks that I worked with at the time who are there now. There's lots of really good folk behind the scenes at Celtic, but my general take is that what you do have is a board. There's two things at play for me. You've got if the right term is benevolent dictator in Dermot Desmond. He is, I think he owns 34% of Celtic, so it's not 51% or whatever, but ultimately nothing happens unless he wants it to happen. So I think what you've therefore got underneath Dermot Desmond is a board that lacks diversity, right? That's a thing. So I don't know how many folk are on the Celtic board. I think there's one woman on the Celtic board and the rest are middle-aged to older white guys. And I don't think there's much by way of fresh thinking going on. I think a lot of the folk that are on the board have been there for maybe 15, 20 years. You don't see a lot of change at Celtic in terms of the board. And actually, you know, this isn't really my world, but there's a suggestion that in terms of, you know, good corporate governance and the way to run a company is no one should sit on a board for longer than 7 years, because after that point, you almost become institutionalized, kind of Stockholm syndrome kicks in, and you don't then speak out against your own board. What I heard from, I think it was Brian Dempsey, and I think it was on the recording, if not when we were chatting off air, me and Brian, was that Fergus McCann, one thing that he did do was he placed a board around him that he knew would challenge him. So Brian Quinn was on that. Brian Quinn eventually became Celtic chairman, and various other figures that I wasn't particularly aware of, but guys that Fergus knew would challenge his way of thinking and his ideas. And that's how any board should run. If you want to have a board of yes men around you, you might do well at times, but you're never going to make progress. There's not going to be any radical thinking or forward thinking. And we say this quite a lot on the show, too much, that if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always got. And in my opinion, that for me, that speaks about Celtic in Europe. Celtic dominate domestically, generally speaking, and have done more or less since Mo Johnston stopped the 10 in 1998. There's been a few spells, Rangers, old or new, have broken the trend, but generally speaking, Celtic have dominated domestically, and that's brilliant. You know, we love that. We embrace those kind of days. But you always want to see your club progressing, and Europe is where you want to see that happening. Well, two areas actually: Europe and developing youth. Celtic don't develop enough of their local talent, and there's so many talented young footballers in Scotland. And why Celtic can't pull any of them through, or not enough of them through, is something that niggles with me. But in terms of European stuff, bar the Seville year, which was as strong a Celtic side as you'll see in modern times under Martin O'Neill, and the odd game, you know, Barca, 7th of November 2012, the historic win under Lenny. Bar that and one or two other examples, Celtic have failed dramatically in Europe. There's no getting away from that. And it does feel that the current board, to a huge extent, are just happy to be there, happy to be at the table. So we turned up the season there with Brendan Rodgers. Did we get 4 points eventually? And that's deemed good enough. I don't think that's good enough. I don't think Brendan Rodgers thinks that's good enough, by the way. But that's maybe a separate story. I know he can split opinion at times. I'm right behind Brendan Rodgers, just to put it on record. But I think Celtic need to show more ambition and speculate to accumulate. Celtic as a club have got this thing going on where they budget for Europa League, so they don't spend until they know guaranteed that they're going to make Champions League. That's why over the years you get Nir Beaton at centre half, and young lads like Owen O'Connell, and Colo Torre in an emergency, all these things. Whereas instead of spending 4, 5, 6 million on the defender in the first place, to say, I'll spend this money just now because I know we get 30, 40 million in return, it's a calculated risk. Celtic as a club are so risk averse. So that's where I'm at with the board. They're so risk averse. There's no fresh thinking. There's a lack of diversity. And Michael Nicholson was a colleague of mine at Celtic at the time. He was, I think, company secretary. And I can't speak highly enough of him. I think he's a brilliant guy, a very decent-minded guy, a huge Celtic fan. And I would just like to see Michael kind of come out on his own and tell us what the vision is, because I think that it's undeniable that he has the club's best interest at heart. But I'd like to see maybe just a wee bit more forward thinking and a wee bit of, here's a 3, 4, 5 year plan. Here's our plan for becoming a force in Europe again. Yeah. Here's our plan for bringing through the next Kieran Tierney, Callum McGregor, James Forrest, things like that. And it's all that the potential is all there for Celtic. The money's in the bank. If we manage to go over the line league-wise this season, the money's going to go through the roof. You're going to be 100 million plus. If you sell Matt O'Reilly for 25 million as well, you might end up getting some money for Jeremy Frimpong. There's money flying into Celtic at this moment in time.
Mikey Johnson.
I love Mikey Johnson. But there's
that's a different pod again.
That's a separate one. But there's so much potential around Celtic, and I would just like to see a bit of fresh thinking. And I hope Michael Nicholson's the guy to drive that. I'm really fond of him. I think he's a brilliant guy. I'd like to see Michael drive things forward, and not. I mean, Fergus McCann dragged Celtic into the modern era 30 years ago. I'd like Michael to now drag us into this modern era and help us progress in Europe and in terms of the youth stuff.
My fear, to go right back to your opening gambit in that, is that Fergus McCann was a Celtic fan who understood what it took to be a business, and he kind of failed on the football side it somewhat.
Yeah.
However, as you rightly said, he'd put in place people who were going to challenge him to make the club as better as it is. You said a fantastic line there. If you keep doing the same things, you'll get the same rewards. And in my opinion, there is a lot of people who hold shares within Celtic who are content with that, because instead of what happens on the pitch, the shareholder is king at Celtic now. That's unfortunately what I believe. And people would say to me, how can people pass? How can everybody think Peter Lawwell's doing a good job? And I'm saying, because the guy who owns 36% of the shares, everybody's getting their dividends. Everybody's getting their dividends. Everybody's getting paid in this deal, apart from us. And we, and sad to say, we are the mugs who kind of keep going, oh, New Jersey, I'm getting away in it. Season ticket, of course I'll get my season ticket, do you know what I mean? And
so So I think as a club you can do both, and that's the frustration for me. So Dermot Desmond trusts Peter Lawwell implicitly.
Yes, 100%.
He put Peter Lawwell in charge of Celtic back in the day. I think Peter Lawwell took over just after Seville, right? So 2003.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And in terms of a business record, he's done a phenomenal job, right? You can't deny it. But Peter Lawwell, to an extent, has done what Fergus McCann done at the time and couldn't move away from the business objectives to allow some more football stuff to flourish. Fergus McCann famously clashed with Tommy Burns because Tommy had the objective of stopping Rangers getting to 9 in a row, and Fergus wouldn't push the boat out for certain signings. And we stopped the 10 and stuff, but I actually think we could have stopped it.
We failed on the line, didn't we, really?
On the last day, May 1998, so that was too close for comfort. And I think Peter Lawwell, I think the stories of penny pinching at times are infamous now. John McGinn's a famous one, Stephen Fletcher. I think there's several guys that Celtic...
They are true. As much as it might be exaggerated, they are true in the basis of he is an accountant running our club and everything's about the bottom line.
Well, I'm almost not going to criticise somebody for that, because if you're accountant, that's your nature.
That's your job, right?
That's what you do. That's why Celtic were run the way they were for so long, and it might not be popular here. And he wouldn't be my favourite guy for different reasons, but you also need to give Peter Lawwell huge credit for some of the things that he achieved. But ultimately, Scott, you and I don't care about shareholders and dividends and all that stuff. You care about a team winning on the park. And that's what I was saying there. I think Celtic can have both. I think you can pay decent dividends to the various shareholders. And there's a whole thing about, there's preference shares and shares that are these emotional shares that a lot of fans have, pinned to the fridge and all that stuff. There's shareholders that get dividends and there's shareholders that don't. There's different kind of breakdowns in the type of share that you have. But I think you can have a situation at Celtic where the big hitters, the Dermot Desmonds and the various others, they'll continue to get paid out on an annual basis, whilst also having a really successful club on the park who now and then take risks, who now and then speculate to accumulate, who when Brendan Rodgers says, can I get that £10 million striker, they say, yeah, okay, you can get him this time. And the frustrating thing is the model's proven itself. When you sign Odsonne Edouard, it pays for itself. When you sign guys like Chris Sutton, John Hartson, Neil Lennon over the years, these guys pay for themselves. They do the job. And, even you look at some of the sales that Celtic have had in recent times, Kieran Tierney, Matt O'Reilly, Jota, spend a bit of money and a bit of quality and it can come back to you. So I just think there's the balance there that Celtic, I'm going to sound greedy here, but you can have it all. And that's the frustration, because it's not like we're scraping the barrel and we just can't afford these guys. Celtic's accounts are there for all to see. They're there in the public eye. You can see it. The club released the figures. There's EGMs, there's AGMs. It is all there for Celtic if they are brave enough to push the boat out.
I agree. Right. Okay. Next one.
Yeah.
What's next for the podcast? What's next for the Celtic Exchange? What's the hopes? Any irons in the fire? Any exclusives for me? Shooting for the stars, my man.
There's no exclusives as such, but what this series has done for us is it's opened us up to a whole new audience that weren't aware of us. So that's brilliant, and we've seen that reflected in some of the numbers for the podcast and on YouTube, which is great. So, what we do, similar to you lads, we done a weekly show. So every Monday night is our weekly show, and then we do pre and post match shows for every Celtic game. And then we've got the special series, so and they can be all sorts of things. So the Battle to Save Celtic far and away has been the biggest special series we've done, but we also run a thing at the moment called CSC Stories, so Celtic Sports Club Stories, and we speak to various CSCs around the globe, which is great. So you're speaking to folk in the States and down south and Geneva and all that stuff, which is brilliant. And then, there's other bits and bobs. We've spoken to Martin O'Neill. He was in the studio a year and a half ago. That was brilliant for us. Spoken to Lubo, all these guys. But what I'm hoping, myself and the guys that run the show, is that the Battle to Save Celtic, I suppose, in a way, it's given us heightened kind of awareness, but I suppose a bit of credibility. People see it and they can kind of see the value in what we're doing, the fact that we're bona fide fans, we've got good knowledge of the club. And I'm just hoping that opens more doors. There's different potential down the line of doing a wee bit more in terms of live shows and things like that. But at the moment, we've got plenty keeping us busy. So I'd love to give you an exclusive, but there's nothing set in stone. But the Battle to Save Celtic has really propelled us into a different space, I suppose, and brought a lot of Celtic fans, or given awareness of us to a lot of Celtic fans that wouldn't have known otherwise, and that's been a brilliant thing for us.
Great. Great, mate. And he's deserved it. Right,
Thank you.
last one, and then we're Joe the top.
Okay.
And it's a big open one for you to dive into. What's going to happen this season?
So I don't know if you know Miff, who's on our show that I've mentioned, and Miff's funny. Miff's the first guy I thought of when we set up the Celtic Exchange. I used to work with Miff. 20 odd, I was 18 when I worked with Miff, actually, and I got to know him then and played a bit of football with him, and he's just a brilliant guy, but hugely passionate about Celtic, but hugely knowledgeable about Celtic, and a guy that can speak and then some. So he was a perfect fit for what we were doing. And Miff spoke on our show around about, I would say maybe late February, something like that, maybe start of March there. And it's a wee clip that we put out on the socials, and it's basically Miff saying, I think Rangers have peaked too early. Right? He gave a bit of background and he went, I think Rangers have peaked too early. And we share that across the various channels. So we are in all the usual places, mostly Twitter, a wee bit of Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok of all places. And we put that clip out, and young team. So Miff get roundly mocked for that, right? Oh, peaked too early. Lots of Rangers fans in the comments, lots of folk hammering them. I'm going to re-release that clip, possibly today, maybe tomorrow, because it's as relevant now as it was 4, 5, 6 weeks ago, because Rangers have peaked too early, if we're being honest. And I'm never one to count my chickens or get cocky. There's a way to go for Celtic, but now Celtic are the only team that can stop Celtic, put it that way. We're in a position where we come out of that game on the 7th of April there. Rangers doing a lap of honour has, I think, triggered their undoing. Celebrating a draw on a day where you could have kind of put, one nail in our coffin in terms of our league aspirations. That is a real loser's mindset. Really naive move. And Philippe Clement comes out. He's got away with a lot so far, but he came out. He was the one that inspired that. He had the badge kissing and all that kind of stuff going on at the time. And if the players think a draw is acceptable and that comes from the top down, then all of a sudden you've dropped your standards. And I think that's been... Listen, I didn't see the Ross County defeat coming, but I think they've... I don't know. They maybe thought they were already over the line. I'm not sure the mentality there. But at this stage in a season, it's kind of not about the players and the ability of the players. It's about the mindset of the players and the mentality to get over the line. And what you've got at Celtic, led by Callum McGregor, supported by Joe Hart, Cameron Carter-Vickers, Rio Hitati, Kyogo, Alistair Johnson, Matt Riley. These are all guys that have won league titles. They've won, less than 12 months ago, they won a treble. So we know what it takes to win a league. We know what it takes to win a Scottish Cup. And Rangers in stadiums with fans do not know how to win leagues. Right? Talk about the COVID season if you want, but that was as weird a season as you'll get. There was weird things happening all across Europe where teams that wouldn't usually win leagues were winning leagues. A lot of strange stuff happening. And you really prove your worth, prove your mettle when the chips are down. You've got a battle there, and how do you respond mentally? And I think you've seen it in the last 4 or 5 days there, starting at Ross County, and you almost knew watching Rangers on Wednesday night against Dundee there. Perversely, you were looking forward to it because you thought there's a really decent chance this group are going to drop points again, and so it played out. And social media has been a fun place the last 24 hours. They have blown it. The wheels have come off. But again, don't want to get ahead of myself there, because despite all of that, and this is where I think Brendan Rodgers really earns his big salary, £3 million a year or whatever. He's been over the course and distance before. He's only ever known success at Celtic. Obviously, we failed in terms of the League Cup just there, but it was 7 trophies for 7 before he moved on first time around. He knows what it takes to win a league, and I've said this before on our show that in terms of his record against Rangers, he's played them 16 times, won 12, drawn 3, lost 1. He knows that fixture inside out, but he also knows how to handle it before, during and after that game. And by that, I mean how he speaks to the press, how he communicates to the fans, and certainly how he speaks to his players. And there'll be loads of stuff that we don't see right now, this week at Lennoxtown, last week at Lennoxtown. But this, you can see it in him. He's all of a sudden more relaxed. He's looked a bit uncomfortable at different times this season.
Definitely.
He looks more relaxed. He came out with a brilliant line this week. This is for Celtic, come alive, bring it on. He is bang up for it. And if he's up for it, his players are up for it. And I think that's what you're seeing. Celtic go to Hampden on Saturday against Aberdeen. I think we're flying. I think we're in a really, really good place. And I put an article out on our website the other day there about how big momentum is in sport and in football in general for us. Momentum is everything. And right now, Celtics is going that way while Rangers is crumbling. Just before we come on, I was on Twitter and I seen Dijon Sterling giving an interview on whatever Radio Clyde after the game last night. The guy sounds like a beaten man. You'll see it'll be viral of sorts, because he's basically saying, I don't think we've got the answers. I don't know what we're going to do. He's speaking defeated. Wow. And that's not just his opinion. That's formed by the guys that he's around, including his manager. So I think they're in a state of disarray. But regardless of that, and it's what Brendan Rodgers has always said, Celtic need to go and deal with their own business. So he'll be making sure that they stay focused. And that's the only danger, is complacency. But if Celtic stay switched on, stay focused, I think we're in a good place.
I agree with 100% of that. I was listening to the returning Hamish the other week, and what was it? He said an absolutely fantastic point. I mean, we probably all knew it, but he was the first one I'd heard somebody saying it. He says, Celtic as a club, they now look like a team who embrace the big games. We embrace the pressure games. You think of every real pressure game, that obviously the Kilmarnock game in hindsight was a big fuck up by us in the cup, but you look at even the European games, whilst the 4 points, I agree with, isn't good enough, especially against the weakest group we've probably ever had in the Champions League. However, let's be honest about it, Atletico Madrid, pumping aside, we generally done all right performance-wise, much better than we have in years. And you look at the Huns games, it's been about hard, but we've got all the line at times. To get ourselves back into 3-2 after going 2-2 was a big set of balls by the team. And as you said, we're in this, the pressure's on, and you know Callum McGregor's fucking busting that team. And to go back to your point about the lap of honour, I don't know where you watched. I watched in my mate's wee bar, and there was 70s there, and everyone else was like, look at the nick of that. And you just know that our players are walking off the pitch looking at that going, right, let's sort this out. You know what I mean? You know it. You just know it.
Yeah. So my brother James that I mentioned, who's on the podcast, I watched it at his bit, and he said at that very moment, he basically said that's the moment they've lost it. That he said it was a horrendous move. And it's just you hear this term getting bounded about the optics of it all. It's how it looks from the outside looking in. You had a stadium, their fan base bought into it. Philip Clement has basically hoodwinked his own support, the moral play and all that kind of stuff. It's just, you would never have seen that. Could you ever see Martin O'Neill celebrating a draw like that, for example? Brendan Rodgers the same, and Lenny's the same. There was such a long way to go at that point. There still is a bit of a way to go. And to celebrate a draw in such a fashion was just really poor. And I think it set the tone, and I think it's played its part. I also think, though, Celtic having I know the first half wasn't great against St Mirren at the weekend, but over the piece, Celtic were decent and well worth the 3-0 win. And I just think Brendan Rodgers coming out with that line afterwards about Celtic coming alive, there's a guy relaxed, enjoying and embracing a title race, whereas the fear is in the eyes. If you look at Philip Clement,
if it had hair before it,
and James Tavernier, see when these guys are speaking to the press just now, they look terrified. They don't have the mental fortitude to go over the line. And I think this is for the experience.
The word you said they are terrified. So I'd forgot about the game last night. I was watching the Arsenal Bayern Munich, and a big pal of mine who helps run the Wayne's football team, Rangers man, he sent me a text at half time, and his words were, Rangers look terrified. Just you saying terrified, and I was like, for fucking it. And I went and checked the score, and I was like, no danger, no way. So, but I'll tell you what my fear is, Celtic. My fear is Celtic, because we haven't been good this year, mate. Right? No matter, it's been good at points, and we have raised our games, and we've had good times. In general, this has been quite a disappointing season, especially coming off of last season. I understand why, to a point. I understand you've changed the manager, you've lost some big players. Some things have went, some things have haven't. I don't think Brendan Rodgers has been unblemished this season. I think some of the stuff he's come out with in the press has been fucking nothing short and scandalous at times. However, everything you're saying about him and the character, I agree with. We've been beat off of Kilmarnock twice this season. We've been beat off of Hearts twice this season. We've got a few demons to be fucking slaying before we can start patting ourselves in the back. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's it. So as you rightly said, the only people who can beat us now is us.
True, but I also think Celtic have now hit their best form of the season, and I think
yeah.
Listen, I think all arguments for and against Brendan Rodgers are valid. We've had different debates with people that follow what we do, and I've spoken the last week or so because someone's accused me of just continually making excuses for him, and that's fine. I'm happy to take that criticism, but he's lost Jota, Moy, and Starfelt. Right, there's no denying the impact of that. The two transfer windows have been horrendous, shockers. The summer one was just a joke, and it's proven now that the 2 January guys are actually having an impact. But at the time, I thought Celtic had the chance to go and sign a decent left back and maybe a more experienced striker. But by the by, but then into the bargain, you've had the ongoing issues that the club had with the Green Brigade, which isn't Brendan Rodgers' fault, but he's had to suffer as a result of that. You've had the saga, which was Leah Labada, and that is hovering in the background, and then ultimately you lose the player and the goals that he brings to the party.
I would have been a big fan of Abada. I've kind of fought Abada's corner a good few times. I thought under Brendan Rodgers he had the potential to be an absolute belter because I thought he'd have just fitted in lovely, and he never got the chance at any point. Injury and whatever happened.
Exactly that, and his numbers speak for themselves, and he would have added goals and assists. There's no doubt about it. And actually, when you watched him in those first, so he came on against Rangers. That was his first game back, wasn't it? End of December, and he got a brilliant reception, no matter what the mainstream media or anyone else wants to tell you. Warmly welcomed back, but you could tell over the next few games he just wasn't at it, and it's clear he's spoken even the last couple of weeks. Just off-field pressures that have led to that. But again, that's a situation that Brendan Rodgers had to deal with. And the last big
Tino, you played football. You played football at quite a good level. And I remember running my amateur team. I've told this story in Homebhoys a million times, but I ran it, and my best player was a wee Irish fella, centre mid, wee Danny. And Danny was moving hoose. And Danny's form just went whoop. And that was the first time in my life that I realised, see, stress is a fucking hard thing, and it affects everything. And you think what that young man was going through out with his own country, in a country where there is a bit of hostility. I've got nothing but sympathy for fucking Leila Bada, to be honest.
I'm the same, 20 years of age. And I think at 20 years of age, I said this to someone else and I get corrected, but some people are quite politically minded at that age, but I would say most of us at that age don't have the knowledge, don't have the life experience and all that stuff. And Leila Bada, I think, is a young guy that just wants to enjoy the life of a young footballer. He took a huge move to come from his home country out to Scotland, and I think he just wants to play ball and enjoy himself and have a nice life. And that's been taken away from him through pressures that are nothing to do with him. And I think he was just in an untenable position. He had to move. And as I say, he's spoken in the last couple of weeks. But you're absolutely right, because footballers, whether it's Leila Bada or others, I think we're as guilty as anybody of thinking they're just robots. Just switch them on and turn them on a Saturday and go and do your thing. Shane Duffy's a great example of that, right? Shane Duffy come to Celtic, and on paper he should have been an easy success.
I disagree, but I'll let you finish.
Right, I'll finish my point. Because he's an experienced Irish international, knew what Celtic were all about, had proven that he could play at not top level English Premier League, but decent kind of mid-level or whatever. He should have come up here and been able to handle it. And the stories we've heard is that he was staying in a hotel. I think he'd split with his partner, and there's a couple of kids there. He was staying in a hotel during COVID times, couldn't mix with the players, couldn't integrate into the city, couldn't enjoy what for a guy like Shane Duffy from Derry should have been the dream move in his career. And pressures off the field led to terrible performances on the field. It just didn't work out for Shane Duffy. And that's just one example, I think, of off-field stuff affecting what you're doing. Tell me otherwise.
No. I agree. Your whole point about that. I mean, I offer Barcast the exact same excuse on that. I offer them. I mean, you've got a guy coming from a different country. I often said on the Homeboys, was it any coincidence that the one guy who hit the ground running in that COVID season that we signed was the guys whose mammy stayed fucking 20 minutes up the road? Turnbull. Know what I mean? He was the only one, because all the rest of them are all like, fuck, what do we do? I mean, El Hamad fucking gave up, didn't he? He was like, I need to get home, man. This is fucking garbage.
Called it a day early. But I think And COVID obviously was a really unique time in everybody's life there, and maybe they're quite extreme examples. But Celtic right now, I don't know, just say I think we've got a squad actually touching on 30, which is too many, but whatever the squad number is, numbers being numbers, and we all hear a lot about mental health and things at this, in this modern day, and rightfully so. There's, just by its nature, a few of those guys will be struggling for different reasons, 100%. And it doesn't necessarily, they won't necessarily struggle because they're having issues at home or relationship stuff or whatever. Some guys will just experience that in life, and then we see them pull on a green and white shirt and wonder why they're a wee bit below par at times. And I know it's not easy to be patient with a footballer, when you turn up expecting them, they're at Celtic, they've got the best sports science, they've got the best everything. But these guys are just human beings, just like you or I, and life's problems will come around at any given time. So, it can happen.
What I would say about Duffy, to come back to it, is I remember at that point, it almost came in the back of Julian getting ragdoll up in Kilmarnock. And all I heard was, all we need is just an old-fashioned centre-half.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting going, that's fucking the opposite of what we need. And do you remember the game? It was at Celtic Park, and Shane Duffy got the ball, because you think he was close to getting sent off on his debut if the boy wasn't offside. He was close. I mean, he brought the boy down in his debut up in Ross County. I think he actually scored in that game. And then it was a game, and he strolled out of defence. And what do we criticize? I mean, look at how much of the ball your defenders have got now. And he fucking lofted the ball right out the path, and I was like, Shane Duffy has been nothing more than a bog standard centre half. And see, for a team who defend like that, I'm all for it. See, for Celtic, we need better than that. So there's where I disagree.
This is where we've actually landed on a guy like Liam Scales. I think Liam Scales is a really decent defender, and I think if your back's to the wall, and he showed it in a couple of the European games and against Rangers at Ibrox. See, when you just need to win your tackles, win your headers, win your duels, he's your man. I think Liam Scales is pretty good at that. But at Celtic, that's not the job of a centre-half. The job is to come out with the ball at your feet and start the attack. You're the guy that starts the attack. You set the ball rolling. And I think if you're a wee bit sluggish at that or not comfy, the best centre-halves are the ones that will take the ball at a centre-half, and instead of passing Carter Vickers to Alistair Johnston at right-back, he'll break the lines and he'll pass to his right winger. He's got the bravery to make the bigger pass. I think Mike Navrocki's shown a wee bit of signs that he can be the guy for that.
I think so, yeah.
Whereas Liam Scales, he'll make the safe pass to Greg Taylor. He'll make the safe pass to Carter Vickers.
The worst example of that was that Hibs game where Ida scored. Seeing that first half where Welsh and Scales basically passed each other, I was ready for punching the wall, man. I was like,
We've called that the horseshoe of death.
Oh, the horseshoe, everybody know. Yeah, all the way around. But this one never even got the horseshoe. It was a fucking middle, wasn't it? It just went like that.
Yeah, that was good. I also think Celtic have tweaked things since then. This will be small changes that Brendan Rodgers has made that we've not seen, but Celtic are in as good a run of form right now as they've been all season. There's a bit of consistency about us. The Hearts game at Tynecastle was a bit of an anomaly, given the sending off and the penalty stuff, but we're in good form, we're in good place, and you can't discount Rio Hatate's inclusion in that. I think he's the guy that makes us tick. I've said for a time now, he is Celtic's most important player, and I think when and Carter Vickers has got to fall somewhere in that, but when Rio ticks, we tick, and I think he's come back at a perfect time.
I'm going to bow to your football knowledge there, right? Because see Rio Hatate, when Rio Hatate was playing, wow, this guy's amazing. And I don't know if I forgot how good he was. I'm being serious, right? Okay. Because I've been arguing, get Carter Vickers back and everything should be good because the big man, so he makes everybody around him look so composed. He's an outstanding player, but best in the league by an absolute stretch. And everybody's saying to me, but Rio's coming back, and I'm going, I can't see Rio coming in and having that immediate impact. Wrong.
Yeah. I think what I like about Hatate, and this is where I debate the whole thing about stats in football. Stats are important in football, right?
Of course,
there's certain things that they cannot tell you. So you used to have a situation, we used to talk about the comparison between Rio Hatate and David Turnbull.
Yeah,
because Turnbull, and he is a talented guy, and he did have that breakthrough season during COVID, but I think he regressed after that. And what he became for me was a very safe player. He would retain possession, and he would turn back out and roll it back to his midfield or his defenders. Whereas Rio Hatate makes that pass, or at least attempts to make that pass. So Hatate's stats will show failed pass, a failed pass, a failed pass. But you just need to get one of those right, and it opens up the game. Or you just need to have one of those attempts on goal. His opener against St Mirren was class, and he's the guy that has got that. He is a bona fide game changer, and they're the kind of guys that you need in the game. And I just think Celtic have got so much more creativity and potential when he's on the park. I quite like Tomoki Iwata. I don't know what you lads think of Iwata, but he's not a game changer. He's a very safe midfielder, and he'll sit at the number 6 and he'll keep things ticking, and he'll let O'Reilly and Hatate go and do their thing. And then when you've got Callum McGregor sitting in the 6, McGregor's also a game changer. So no disrespect to Iwata, but he will never have the impact on games that these guys have. And I think Celtic, particularly domestically, you need the guys that are going to unlock defences and become creators. And I think Ray Hatate's top of that tree.
The frustrating thing on the Iwata side is, I remember the game, I think Big O scored a couple of goals against Hibs, and it was a midweek game. And we played Iwata in the defensive midfield role. And I was sitting in the main stand, I was sitting in my mate's seat for this game. And I think it's amazing how sitting in different areas of the ground gives you a totally different perspective of the game. So my season tickets behind the goal, in the Celtic end towards the corner. So I'm kind of seeing the lines. So you can see the lines, you can see the counter attack's good. But obviously I'm sitting in the main stand and I'm practically centre. So I'm watching the whole game. And with Iwata in that game, it kind of showed up to me why Celtic didn't need a proper defensive midfielder in a lot of league games.
Yeah.
The ball was going by him, and you can see him wanting the ball, but you can see them almost, you're in the fucking way. Do you know what I mean? Get away, because I need to get it to here. And the annoying thing about that is, in Europe, if we had a proper defensive midfield, it would solve fucking a lot of problems we've got. Do you know what I mean?
That's a challenge, because I think it's pretty unique what Celtic have to do. Celtic have to go from playing against a low block Livy at home or at Almonville or whatever, and then play Atletico Madrid during the week. And they're just so completely different challenges, and it's just very hard for Celtic to deal with. So Iwata's comfy in that role there, but then you get into Europe and you actually need two of them. You need this double pivot that people speak about. But if you were to practice that during the domestic campaign, you'd get roundly mocked for playing two defensive midfielders against Livingston or St Mirren or whatever. So it's very hard for a manager to say, we'll do this most of the season, but for 6 games or hopefully 8 games in the new Champions League format, we need to play a completely different way.
Yeah, and I think that comes for the fact that we are the prominent team in Scotland. Like, because I was sitting with my brother-in-law, who's a cunt bun, and he was asking me, why do you think you don't? Because I'm sitting going, well, I think Ange is a better manager than Van Bronckhorst. I think he's a better manager than Steven Gerrard. I think he's a better manager than Orion. Yet they've all had results in Europe, proper results. And I suggested to it, he didn't like it, is that Rangers are chasing. So Rangers are at the stage where anything is acceptable for a win. Whereas we are the leaders. It's not acceptable. It'd be fucking garbage and winning. We'd all be sitting going, what is this pish? You know what I mean? Whereas the Huns have got that comfort that they're allowed to be shit. So it leads in Europe that it kind of works, if that makes sense.
Perfect sense. I think if you speak to any sensible Rangers fan from that time, they'll accept that Walter Smith played turgid football, but it won. You know, you won things, and a lot of folk will say that's what it's all about. And I think Celtic are unique in terms of that's not what it's all about. See if Celtic just drossed their way to league and cup wins, the manager that's doing that wouldn't last too long. You know, you just, this is cliche romantic stuff when it comes to Celtic. But you get guys like Bertie Auld saying, and it still applies, Celtic fans are there to be entertained, and it's not enough just to win 1-0 and grind out results. You go in the hope that you see good football, and I think that's where guys like Ange wouldn't bow on his principles. Brendan Rodgers is the same. Now, you see some thousands in Europe, and we need to change that. But these guys believe in what they do, and I think they want to play open and expansive football. And I think for the most part, that's what we want. I mean, I spoke earlier in the piece there, Scott, about really wanting to see progress in Europe. But does that mean a manager taking a more pragmatic approach? And do we as fans need to get on side with that? Maybe. I don't have the answers to that.
It's another podcast, mate.
Yeah.
It's another podcast. Right,
Exactly.
I'm going to wrap up there because
Okay.
that was. I've got the feeling me and you could sit for an hour. We could do a Homeboys. We could be sitting for 4 hours, a couple of cans.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm just going to finish off. Where can people find you online? Where can they listen? Where can they watch the show? And then you want to sell to the world, go ahead.
Okay, so we've got the website, thecelticexchange.com. So generally speaking, there's links to everything that we do there, whether it's the podcasts, blog articles, social media stuff. In terms of social media, I mentioned we're across the various spaces, you know, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and even TikTok and all that stuff. But we spend most of our time on Twitter. So most of our engagement is on Twitter and places like that. The Battle to Save Celtic, if you just search the Battle to Save Celtic on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, you'll find that. And as I say, that's something we're genuinely pretty proud of, and it's available in any podcast player and across YouTube if anyone wants to check that out. Anything else I want to sell? Not really. I suppose I genuinely want to thank guys like yourself, Scott. You know, it was Joe Blogs from Celtic Wiki that put me onto you guys in terms of, I was well aware of you guys and what you do, but he said that you'd been speaking about the Battle to Save Celtic, and I tuned into that, and it was great to hear you speaking so kindly. But generally speaking, everyone, Matthew Marr that I've mentioned a few times, Paul John at Axum, Matt Corder I mentioned, Joe Blogs, the various guests. There's been a lot of people that have made this. So like, it's myself that's been doing the shows, but there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind it to allow them to happen, and a lot of people being kind with their time and stuff like that. So it's a genuine thanks to them, and for everyone from the 4th of March when we released the first episode to right now, the real kind comments continue to come flooding in. So it's just a genuine thanks to everyone that's supported what we do or what we've done there with the Battle to Save Celtic, and hopefully a lot of those folks will stick around for whatever's to come for the Celtic Exchange.
Brilliant, mate. Absolutely brilliant. Well, Tino, Celtic Exchange, thank you very much, sir. And hopefully we'll catch up again. We'll maybe get a wee chat. But anyway, all the best, pal, all right?
Thanks, mate. I've really enjoyed it, Scott. So hopefully see you and the lads sometime again soon.